On our broadcast tonight from Dallas, Texas, remembering 50 years ago today, one of the darkest days in American history.
From NBC News, President Kennedy and Governor John Connally of Texas have been cut down by assassin's bullets in downtown Dallas. We'll repeat that. President Kennedy and Governor John Connally of Texas have been cut down by assassin's bullets in downtown Dallas.
The assassination of John F. Kennedy, 50 years later. This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting tonight from Dallas.
And good evening from Dallas, Texas. We're in Dealey Plaza, just across from the 6th floor window in the Texas School Book Depository building, where 3 shots were fired 50 years ago today that changed the course of American history. And here in the shadow of that very building, it was a perfectly awful day. 35 degrees, rain and wind, perfectly matching how dark it felt to be here today. And going back 50 years ago tonight, by this time of night, right now, Air Force One had just landed back in Washington, D.C., carrying the president's casket, his widow Jacqueline Kennedy, and the new president, Lyndon Johnson. Most Americans were home for the day, schools and offices let out early, and millions by this time were huddled around their television sets where they would remain transfixed, watching the coverage on and off for the next 4 days. Here now is how David Brinkley started off this broadcast on this very night 50 years ago.
Good evening. The essential facts are these. President Kennedy was murdered in Dallas, Texas. He was shot by a sniper hiding in a building near his parade route. He was dead within an hour. Lyndon Johnson is President of the United States.
NBC News from November 22nd, 1963, just over 6 hours after the shots were fired from the building here behind us, meaning this place and this city and our country would never be the same. The cold and wind and rain here in Dallas today was a sharp contrast to the bright sunshine of 50 years ago. Weather beautiful enough to ride in an open car. Today, 1/2 century later, thousands turned out to remember John F. Kennedy.
The people of this city have been filled with a sense of industry born of tragedy.
The place is little changed since that day 50 years ago. Thousands were here then, too. People lined the motorcade route, the final critical moments captured by the film camera of Abraham Zapruder.
Pierce, how are you?
Across the street that day was Pierce Allman, then 29 years old, a local broadcaster. He heard the shots, heard Mrs. Kennedy cry out, in fact. He ran into the book depository building. In the doorway, he passed and spoke to Oswald, not knowing he was the assassin. Inside, he used the only available phone line to report live details on the air.
This was the door you entered. This was the door. It's changed, and when you go inside, the lobby is totally different. But when I ran up from here and ran up the steps, there was a guy standing in the doorway, and I said, "Where's the phone?" And he jerked his thumb and he said, "In there." So I made eye contact, briefly brushed by, and went in and got on the only phone in the lobby.
This is Pierce Allman from the Texas School Book Depository building for WFAA News.
In the motorcade through Dallas that day, hosting the president, Texas Governor John Connally, who was shot sitting in front of Kennedy.
I knew the president was hit, and I said, "My God, they're going to kill us all."
The motorcade sped to Parkland Hospital, where the president was quickly pronounced dead.
President Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is about 35 minutes ago.
For all anyone knew, the U.S. was under attack. There was more coming. The new president, Lyndon Johnson, feared a wider plot.
What raced through my mind was that if they had shot our president driving down there, who would they shoot next? And what was going on in Washington? And when would the missiles be coming?
On board Air Force One that day, Westinghouse reporter Sid Davis was there when Johnson was sworn in.
He was as calm and deliberate. He thought of just about everything.
I ask for your help and God's.
America, America. Today here in Dallas, they sang the Navy hymn for Navy veteran John F. Kennedy. In this city where there are still so many reminders of that day half a century ago. Not just Dealey Plaza itself and the School Book Depository building, but also the Texas Theater where Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested that afternoon, and the Municipal Building, Dallas Police Headquarters, where Oswald was shot on live television 2 days later. People gathered today in Dearborn, Michigan to see the JFK presidential limousine. They gathered in Boston at the JFK Library to see the flag that covered the casket and to hear James Taylor.
Never give up, never slow down, never grow old, never ever die young.
Astronaut and Navy Commander Chris Cassidy read Kennedy's words.
I am talking about genuine peace. The kind of peace that makes life on Earth worth living.
The kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children.
Today, the historian David McCullough reminded this crowd what was important about John F. Kennedy.
He knew words matter. His words changed lives. His words changed history.
And about that last man we just heard from, the organizers of this event today were wise enough to invite one of the wisest men in our nation to speak here today, the great historian and author David McCullough. After the public ceremony, we met inside the Book Depository building to talk about Dallas, about John F. Kennedy, and the course of history.
I think the three things that I would value most, not just from my point of view, but from the point of view of the country and the history of the country, are his use of language, his use of words to move us, to lift us, like Lincoln did, and Franklin Roosevelt could. His breaking the barrier of religious rules of who gets in and who doesn't, and the way he did it. No self-pity, no, okay, it's time for us, no. And he's going to the moon. Going to the moon, we take it now for granted. Yeah, of course, we went to the moon, yeah,
It gave us a national
but it was emblematic, it was symbolism. Yeah. We can do what we determined if we work together. And we've got to remember that. You've got to work together. It's a joint effort. And yes, you can have political differences, but we're all in this together. And if we don't stop playing these childish games in national politics and get back to the job at hand, we're going to be in the soup.
It occurs to me that the majesty is in the presidency, how we elect them, how we inaugurate them, the trappings of office. But thinking that we've had a president assassinated at an exposition, we've had a president assassinated in the theater, and in this perfectly ordinary setting.
Yes, I think that's what strikes me about it here. It could be anywhere USA. It's not a great ceremonial. Something would have to happen here. If you go to Little Bighorn, for example, you know something had to have happened here. It's like a Greek setting. Here, no. Main Street, anywhere USA.
Historian and author David McCullough on the Kennedy legacy and on this very place. On November 22nd in 1963, Tom Brokaw was a young reporter in Omaha. He read the news of the assassination on the air, in fact. He's with us from back home in New York tonight. And Tom, it was Frank McGee who said on NBC that day that for years to come, generations, people will ask, where were you when you heard Kennedy was assassinated, which of course is both the title and theme of the 2-hour documentary you are hosting for us tonight.
Thank you, Brian. And if I could just ride on the words of the great David McCullough, I think there was another element in all of this that helped us 50 years later remind each other about why we remembered. He was the first generational president who came along when television was pervasive in America, so he was a familiar figure to everyone wherever they lived, in the big cities, small towns, in remote areas. And so when he was taken away at that young age, this dynamic man, it was a shock to the system because they felt that they knew him not just as president, but as a friend. And we thought that that JFK style would be around for a long time. But it also died on the day that he was murdered, because he was replaced by Lyndon Johnson, who was a more traditional pol. So the fickle finger of history moved on that day, and it took us in an entirely different direction than we had anticipated when he began his motorcade in Dallas. It was a day that changed how we thought about life, Brian.
And Tom, it felt very fresh here today, 50 years later. Tom, thanks. This airs tonight, by the way. Tom Brokaw hosting Where Were You the Day JFK Died? That's tonight at 9, 8 Central, here on this NBC station. For us here in Dallas, we'll take a break for now. There's much more news to get to tonight, including a big storm moving across a huge part of this country. Dramatic rescues already in the west, and it could threaten.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a press report over the wires. We hope that it is unconfirmed, but we have to doubt it, that the President of the United States has been the victim of an assassination. The funeral march from Beethoven's Third Symphony.
That is exactly what the Boston Symphony Orchestra went on to do 50 years ago tonight in Boston. One of the countless chilling moments from that day. Remember, a nation before cell phones and internet and portable devices, in shock as word of mouth spread across the country. And we're going to end tonight with the words of JFK. We'll listen to what made him different, why he mattered so much in life as he did, and why so much was lost right here 50 years ago.
We stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of the 1960s. I'm asking each of you to be pioneers towards that new frontier. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom.
The kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living. The kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.
I look forward to a great future for America. A future in which our country will match its military strength with our moral restraint, its wealth with our wisdom, its power with our purpose. I look forward to an America which will not be afraid of grace and beauty. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures. And we are all mortal.
President John F. Kennedy, whose life came to an end no more than 300 yards behind us here in Dallas 50 years ago today. That is our broadcast for this Friday night and for this week. Thank you for being here with us. I'm Brian Williams reporting tonight from Dallas. We'll look for you back home in New York on Monday night. In the meantime, have a good weekend. Good night.